Hello, I'm Judy Stiles. Thank you for joining us this week on Newsmakers. The November elections left a lot of people talking about what's going to happen in Congress after the first of the year, but there's much more work ahead for Congress. Joining me today is Congressman Billy Long. Thank you for being here today.
You bet. Thanks for the invite. I always enjoy these little updates with you.
Right. Well, I'm going to fill people in on what's happening in Washington and what's going to happen, perhaps. And I'm sure a lot of people are still curious about the results from the November election and your feelings about that.
Right. In my 4 years in Washington, when we go back in January, it'll be the first time that we've actually had a chance to pass legislation from the House, pass it through the Senate, and get it to the President's desk. And I think that that's what a lot of people didn't understand when they say nothing's being accomplished, you're not getting anything done. And what we kept saying is, hey, we're passing bills out of the House, but they're sitting on Harry Reid's desk, the leader of the Senate. Mm-hmm. And the public finally caught up to that and found out what was going on. When they found out there were 387 bills stacked up on Harry Reid's desk, they said enough is enough. And I think that's what you saw in the election results earlier this month, is that people want us to get things done, want us to work together. So now we'll be able to pass legislation out of the House, pass it through the Senate, and get it to the President's desk. Now, he can choose whether to veto it or sign it into legislation at that point.
So that's a big part of the process, and the people understanding how government works is Congress passes the bills, the President signs them, so you still have to have that first step of the process going through to even get to the President.
Exactly, and according to the Constitution, we hold the purse strings in the House. A lot of people don't realize that either, because you can originate a bill in the Senate, you can originate a bill in the House, but if it's going to spend money, it has to start in the House. And when they passed the President's health care legislation, they took a House bill, Senator that we had passed out of the House, sent it to the Senate. They stripped everything out of it. They stripped the title of the bill, the entire contents of the bill. The only thing they held was the number of the bill. And then they rewrote everything they wanted and called it the Affordable Care Act, sent it back. So technically, it was a bill that started in the House, but that's how out of skew things have gotten in Washington. They could take a bill, strip everything out of it, only retaining the number to usurp the Constitution, I say, because Obamacare, the health care plan, spends a lot of money, should have never started in the Senate.
So a lot of procedural things that we'll be looking for. And then, of course, you'll have the challenge of potential presidential vetoes once those do get to the President.
And he can threaten to veto a lot of bills, but then will he really veto them? We'll have to see. The Keystone XL pipeline is a prime example. Right. We voted on the 14th of November in the House, very bipartisan vote. I think it was 265 votes for, or maybe 256. It was way above the 218 threshold. Sent it to the Senate. They voted on November 18. They had 59 votes. Of course, you have to have 60 votes to pass anything out of the Senate. It did not pass then. So we're hopeful at the 1st of January we could get that vital legislation over to the President and let him really decide if he wants to veto a bill that's going to create over 42,000 good paying jobs for hardworking Americans, allow us to cut down by half the oil we're buying out of the Middle East. That pipeline will handle half the oil that we're buying from the Middle East right now, and I'd a lot rather buy oil from people that like you than people that don't like you.
And as we're recording this program, people are seeing lower gas prices. They're saying, well, things are getting better on the fuel, but we're still facing energy challenges in our country.
Right, and we found out that we used to say we're the Saudi Arabia of coal in this country, but we're starting to find out we're the Saudi Arabia of oil in this country with all the new technology. And North Dakota has a tremendous boom in oil, and you see we're down 88 cents a gallon on what we were just a very few months ago. I filled up yesterday, $2.44 a gallon, and people, that's an 88-cent rebate that they're getting on every gallon, and that goes into the economy, into the local stores, into the shops in Joplin, Missouri, where people can support the local merchants, and that's a very good thing.
And we mentioned the Keystone Pipeline. Your constituents, people in this part of the country, have a concern or interest in that because it's going to be run close to this part of the country.
Right, and it's a very, very sound project. It was passed, I forget how many months ago or years ago now. I think it was 6 years ago that the original proposal was passed, and it's just been waiting, and the President absolutely will not sign it. And they say, well, it may not be environmentally sound. If you pull up a pipeline map across the United States of all pipelines, whether they're water, oil, gas, whatever it is, those are all 50, 60, 70, 80-year-old pipelines. They're not nearly as safe as this state-of-the-art Keystone Pipeline they're going to build. Plus, right now, we're using all our rail cars to haul oil with, and so that's not safe, hauling it above ground. As we have found out, there's been some train wrecks. It also takes those trains out of service for other parts of our economy, and that's costing things to escalate in price.
Now, you mentioned the economy. People are always interested in the economy and how it's looking. We've heard job reports, we've heard unemployment reports. What is your general feel on how we're looking on the economic side of things?
I think things are starting to look up a little bit, but of the bills that I mentioned on Harry Reid's desk, 45 or so approximately are job-specific bills. We worked very hard in this 113th Congress that's going to close out on January the 5th, will be the last day of this Congress, to pass those good job bills, and they're sitting on Harry Reid's desk. So we'll get a lot of those passed again over to the Senate, passed and on over to the President for his signature. And that's what we've really been working on this last 2 years, is job creation. And I think that things are starting to turn the corner a little bit. And I think the American public said, hey, enough's enough. We're fed up. We're tired of you passing bills and them sitting on the desk over there in the Senate.
And when we think of jobs, we think of you mentioned new types of technology, but also, old-fashioned manufacturing. Those jobs where we're still needing to build things.
Which is vitally important to the people of the 7th District of Missouri. I do a manufacturing tour every year, a lot of it here in the western end of the district, where there's a lot of great manufacturing jobs. And you go into these manufacturing facilities, which I love to do, and there are hard-working people in there that come up, and they're so proud to tell their congressman, I've been here 12 years. Mr. Long, I've been here 18 years. This is my 27th year. These are not easy jobs. These are tough manufacturing jobs, but they love their work. All the people that work there want is to work hard and provide for their family. All the folks that own the place want is to be able to give those people good-paying jobs and turn a profit. And sometimes a profit's a dirty word in Washington, but we don't think it is. So we do everything we can to augment manufacturing.
And we heard at some point, about people outsourcing manufacturing jobs because of the economy. You feel that would be on the decrease as well?
Well, that's going to have to do with tax policy more than anything. You saw the other day where Burger King bought a place called Tim Hortons Donut Shop up in Canada with the theory they're going to move up there and avoid paying taxes in the United States. And that's a very interesting dynamic, because what happened there, a few years ago, Canada had some of the highest corporate tax rates in the world. People were fleeing Canada. The Canadians said, enough's enough. We need to lower our corporate tax structure, which they have now, one of the best places in the world. So now everyone's fleeing to Canada. And so we need to lower our corporate tax rate in this country. I was very hopeful at the start of the 113th Congress, which started January 3 of 2013, that we'd be able to address tax policy with Dave Camp as chairman of Ways and Means and Max Baucus over in the Senate side. Max Baucus announced he wasn't going to run for re-election, and he's now ambassador to China. And Dave Camp is stepping down as chairman of Ways and Means, because on the Republican side we term limit our chairmanships to 6 years. So we knew he was at the end of his rope. We knew Max Baucus was at the end of his, and they both wanted to make tax reform a signature policy. But as fate would have it, it didn't happen. So hopefully we've got to address that to get more jobs for folks in this country.
So that's something the new Congress will be looking at.
Oh, definitely. That's one of the most important things, is the tax structure, making it fairer for everyone.
Okay. And we also talk about items that deal with immigration as one of those items that we've recently, it's current events, the president having his presidential act, to dealing with immigrants. And what are you hearing from constituents as far as what he's done and what this country's facing?
He has done it so recently, we haven't heard a ton since he made his announcement last Friday, but leading up to that, our phones were absolutely melting down, phone lines ringing off the wall. People are furious about it. They don't want him to act on immigration with executive authority, and that's exactly what he's done. And in the past, they say, well, Reagan did it and Clinton did it. Well, they were affecting existing law. They were tweaking immigration laws that had passed. The House, the Senate had been signed into law by the president. This president went on record back in March of 2011 saying that I cannot do that. I can't just act arbitrarily to not deport people and whatever I want to do. What's turned around, that's exactly what he has done. So when you hear people talking about, well, other presidents did it, they did it, but they were working on existing laws, tweaking laws. He's writing his own laws from the Oval Office right now, and the American public's not going to stand for it.
So do you think there's some confusion? People saying, well, the president can do this. What can the Congress do? Where do we stand on that?
Right. And a lot of people, that's another thing they complain to me about. They say, hey, can't you stop him? Can't you stop this guy? And the best way I can explain that is we held Eric Holder in contempt of Congress on another issue, the gun running, the Fast and Furious, when they thought it'd be a good idea to take these guns down to the Mexican border and disperse them and let them, they were going to follow the guns to catch the criminals, craziest thing you ever heard of. And Eric Holder wouldn't come forward with the documents and the emails and things on Fast and Furious. So we held him in contempt of Congress about 3 years ago. So he goes to court. Where does he go to court? In D.C. Who appointed that judge he was in front of? President Obama. He threw it out. And so that's why it's so tough when the president controls the Justice Department. That's why it's so tough to stop a lot of this. But now that the American public has spoken so strongly and loudly, I think we're going to be able to get some things done. And on the immigration in particular, the president had things his way for his first 4 years in office. He had control of the House, the Senate, and the Oval Office. He didn't act on immigration when he could. He could have done everything. He could have got any bill passed he wanted. He could have written his own immigration thing, got it passed by the House, the Senate, and he could have signed it. But immigration wasn't important to him when he was in charge, because I think that they knew that it wasn't popular with the American public. They didn't want the members of the Democratic House and the Democratic Senate, those Democrat members, to have to take tough votes on immigration. So he thought, I'll just wait and I'll do it by executive order. And I think that's what you're seeing play out now.
Will we see more of that, the follow-up to that in January with the new Congress as well?
That depends on the president's attitude. I was people ask me, what's going to happen in the election? What's going to happen? They always think you have an inside track, which you really don't by being a member. How many Senate seats will we get? Well, I was pretty close. I said we'd get 54, 55. And after the December 6th runoff in Louisiana, which it looks like that's over, Bill Cassidy's going to win that seat, we'll have 54 seats, which I said 54, 55. So we're going to have a strong representation in the Senate. We picked up House seats. Our goal was 245. Again, after the runoff in Louisiana, we should have 247. So we went from 233 to 247 in the House, picked up seats in the House, seats in the Senate. And I was hopeful that the president would do like Bill Clinton did in '94 when he got his head handed to him in an election and got beaten severely at the election. He said, I'm going to turn around and work with the Republicans, get some good things done for the country. The Republicans worked with the president, welfare reform, things such as that. And I was really hopeful that this president would say, hey, it's up. Time's up. We're going to work with the Republicans. But he has taken a hard left turn after the election. His news conference right after the election was 2/3 of the American people didn't vote, and they were all Democrats. That's not exactly what he said, but it's what he meant, and that's how it came out. He said the people that stayed home support me and support my policies would have voted for me. He said before the election that this election is going to be a referendum on my policy, and boy, howdy was it.
So people, do you feel that the bipartisan politics is a big issue for voters? Are people wanting to know, why do we have to always have political lines drawn?
Right. And I think that people will start to see now that we get legislation passed that hopefully some of those bipartisan lines will shift away and we can do things together. As Ronald Reagan said, he said, I'd rather get 80% of what I want and fly my flag another day than I would to go off the cliff and not get anything, because a lot of people think if you can't get 100% of your position, you should take a pass and wait until you can get 100%. Well, that just doesn't happen in politics. So if we can compromise with the Democrats and get 80% of what we want in good legislation and pass it, that's what we should do. I think Ronald Reagan was right on that respect, and that's the way I think that most of the members of Congress look at it.
Well, another issue that Congress has been looking at for quite a while is the budget. Every year we seem to come into a situation where we have a crisis, we have to temporarily pass some items. What are your feelings about the U.S. government's budget?
We haven't passed a budget really in 7 or 8 years. They passed a budget in the Senate this year, but we haven't legislated like you should legislate for 7 or 8 years now in this country, and it's just wrong. December 11, that is supposed to be our last day in Congress for this Congress, the 113th Congress. Then we'll go back after New Year's and January 6th. All the 60-some new members will get sworn in the House, and all the new members in the Senate on January the 6th. And so we have to act on a budget before December 11, or the country's going to be out of money. So we've got to decide, do we do another continuing resolution, or do we do a larger overarching bill that will take us to the end of the fiscal year to September 30? And a lot of people think that it's better just to do a continuing resolution until, say, the end of January when the Republicans are in control. Then they can set the parameters. Others argue that it's better to do a large bill that will take us to September 30. Some people say, well, the president controls the purse strings. That's not really accurate. If we set the budget, then we can control where that money's going. And so there's going to be a fight between now and December 11. So we're all going to have a nice, pleasant Thanksgiving this week with our family and friends, and then it's going to be back at it on Monday morning when we fly back up there.
So as I say, stay tuned for that debate.
Right.
Coming up in Washington. Other issues, the country, of course, the people are seeing many more headlines on international issues, concerned about the terrorism, the situation with ISIS, and are you hearing concerns from your constituents of what's happening overseas? How's that going to affect us here?
Right, and I think that's a lot of this ISIS thing right now is the dramatic videos of the beheadings and things of that nature that they're putting out that just, of course, infuriates people in this country. Chuck Hagel, Secretary of Defense, is stepping down. We learned this morning on my drive over from Springfield, and apparently the president has kind of forced him out. They've had meetings the last 2 weeks, and when he told him how he wanted the last 2 years of his presidency to run, Chuck Hagel obviously said, "I've had enough." The president has not had a real clear foreign policy in the 6 years he's been there. And when you don't have a clear foreign policy, it's tough for the Secretary of Defense to carry out a policy that you don't have. So I don't know who he's going to put in that slot next for Secretary of Defense, but I think it's going to take boots on the ground at some point. We're able to do the airstrikes, which I'm glad the president is doing, and I supported the president on that, and I think that it's really cut down on ISIL's ability. It's stopped them going into some cities, but you're not going to gain situational control of anything without boots on the ground, whether they're UN boots, whether they're American boots or whatever. But at some point, I think to really control ISIL or ISIS, however you want to say it, it's going to take boots on the ground.
Now, are you hearing from veterans or people who may have served in Iraq or, and now have come home and then they're seeing what's happening since they left?
They're very sad about it. They're very sad about it. We spent a lot of blood and treasure in trying to make that a better situation, and they're very sad now to see that we just pulled out arbitrarily and said we're done, and then now you see what's coming back in its place. And there was a discussion a couple of years ago, and they were protesting. I know on the streets of Springfield, Missouri, they were protesting about going into Syria. Don't bomb Syria. Do bomb Syria. Don't bomb. Do bomb. My calls were about 98-2 to not bomb Syria, and my position was don't bomb Syria because you don't know who you'll be handing things over to. A lot of people just said, "Oh, go in and bomb, take out Assad, and that'll be that." Well, my concern was who we were handing over to. As it turns out, I was right. We would have been turning it over to ISIS, and so it's a very sticky wicket over there.
Very complicated web of how things work in the Middle East in that part of the world. We mentioned veterans, and there's been an emphasis on trying to improve things with the Veterans Administration and the hospitals.
Yes,
update on where we're standing with those types of changes.
Well, I think that we're starting to see a little bit of good come out of that situation. It was in such poor condition that it's going to take a while. The Veterans Administration was on life support. The good news to report is that here locally, the veterans that get serviced in Mount Vernon right now have done nothing but sing the praises of the Mount Vernon Clinic. Unfortunately, it looks like that is going to be on the chopping block. A few months after I was sworn in, I learned that back in 2008, 3 years before I went up there, they had commissioned a study, and that study said we want to build a clinic in Springfield, Missouri, Joplin, Missouri, which your listeners may not have heard of, and Bella Vista, Arkansas. So they want to build 3 new clinics. At that time, there was no mention of closing Mount Vernon. It was talking about adding clinics. And they asked me what I thought about that, and I thought, great, anything to help serve the veterans, everyone's for that.
So they wouldn't have to travel to.
And then later, some people tried to pretend that it was me that wanted to close the Mount Vernon Clinic, which was total hogwash. The decision was made 3 years before I got there, and so now with the University of Missouri situation where they're closing the chest hospital, they used to call it over there, it's going to be tough for them to stay, but I think they've worked out a deal now where they can stay until the new clinics are built. So hopefully it'll be better for the veterans at that point. But I know people in Joplin will be excited to be able to go to a VA clinic right here in Joplin instead of have to drive anywhere.
So saving that travel when they need those
sure,
services.
Yeah, because a lot of times
together.
our veterans are not able to travel easily. They're in latter stages of their life, and it's not easy for them to travel. Usually their caregivers and elderly too, and it's tough to get a ride to the clinic. So if they can access the clinics quicker and better, I think it's going to be great for everybody. But it needs a lot of work. Things have spun completely out of control with the Veterans Administration, and I can't get any answers out of the Veterans Administration, even where the new clinic may be built in Springfield, let alone the one in Joplin.
So those are ideas, but they haven't become fruition or specific locations.
Right, and they hold their cards so close to their chest they won't even tell me what everybody thinks, that I'm in control and that Billy Long's wanting to build this clinic, and they won't even tell me where it's going to be. Yeah.
Well, speaking of health and clinics, people are still talking about the health care reform, and we're at that time of year again for people enrolling for next year's. Are you hearing a lot from your constituents as far as that?
Yeah, we're mainly on the premium front, where everyone's premiums have risen so dramatically, and that was another thing we were told by this administration, is that health care costs will go down approximately $2,500 per family, where they've gone up $3,600 per family. And so, yeah, I still hear a lot about the health care situation. And now that the enrollment is rolled back around, it's going to be interesting to see how many people actually sign up again.
So there's that push to try to get people from the government to go saying, please enroll, but you don't know the numbers until the closing.
Right, exactly.
What you're looking at. Well, another topic, I know you're in town in the region. You've spent some time, you've talked about education a week or so ago when you're here. You're going to visit some school. What about the focus of education in our country and perhaps what the federal government's enrolled?
I think that the federal government should have the smallest role in education possible. I always think that the schools are best served by the parents on the PTA, the local administrators, the local school board. It's a great tradition in America that we have local control of our schools, and I always say that unfortunately our schools get 85% of their edicts out of Washington, how to act and what to do, and 15% of the money out of Washington. And I think that anything we can do, I have a group of school principals that I put together, or actually school superintendents, and we invite them all to a dinner every once in a while, so I can get every superintendent in the 7th District or their assistant or someone to attend these meetings, where I can listen to them and find out what's going on in the schools. And that's been extremely popular with the school superintendents, knowing that I reach out to them and that I want to find out firsthand what's going on. The school lunch program is another prime example where the president's wife, and her good-heartedness, she wanted to make kids healthy, which is fine. We all think we should keep our children healthy and teach them how to eat better and everything. But you talk to the administrators of these schools and these superintendents, a lot of them have shopped out their food service because they cannot meet these guidelines. And you go around and look at these football players and some of the larger kids in school, and if they have a little tiny bit of rice on their plate, then they can have no bread with that meal. They get a very small little chicken breast or something, and it's just, and most of it goes in the trash. They said we throw out more food than what the kids are eating because it has no taste, it's bland. Yeah, it might be healthy, but they're not going to eat it, so they're going to stop on the way home and probably get a Hostess cupcake or something.
So even though the government might be subsidizing lunches, they're not necessarily eating those lunches in many cases.
Right. They've gotten to the point now, and the portions are so tiny on the kids, and instead of getting rice and green beans and chicken and maybe Jell-O and whatever and bread, oh no, you can't have bread and rice on the same plate, and the rice has to be so small you can't hardly find it.
Well, in addition to food guidelines, do you hear people concerned about the federal government telling them what they should teach in their schools? We've heard a lot about the fight about control of the academic side of things.
Sure, and again, I think all of that should be left at the local level. I think that things that are taught in school are going to be different in Springfield than they are Kansas City or St. Louis or Joplin, DeBranson, all the different school districts. Branson's going to be a lot different than St. Louis, and Joplin's going to be a lot different than Kansas City, and even Springfield and Joplin, 70 miles apart. There's going to be different requirements by these school administrators, and that's why it's good to talk to the superintendents and find out. Everyone wants to be successful. Everyone wants their kids to achieve. Everyone wants their children to do good on these test scores, get in good colleges and universities if that's what they choose, such as Missouri Southern. And so we want the local folks to have the biggest say over the schools and not the people in Washington. And a lot of times it's not an elected official in Washington. It's the bureaucrats, the unelected bureaucrats at the NEA and different places that
creating policy
for
their offices and so forth. You mentioned Missouri Southern higher education. Of course, a lot of our audience interested in how the government is perhaps helping with student loans, student ability to go to school. Right.
And there's always been this big thing about the student loan and the student loan programs and the debt accrued by students, and sometimes their debt outstrips their earning capacity far and away. So those things all need to be addressed.
Looking at that. Well, looking ahead, as you mentioned, a lot of challenges when you get back to Washington after the Thanksgiving break. Do you anticipate being able to come home on the 11th, or do you think you'll be there a little longer this year?
I imagine we'll be there longer. They always, a few years ago, we were there through New Year's Day. We worked New Year's Eve, New Year's Day, and into the new year. And again, it's such an interesting dynamic because we're going to have 60 new folks in the House, just on the House alone, on January 6th. So the ones that are voting between now and the end of the year, or even we may work up to January 5th. I hope we can get out when we're supposed to on schedule, but that's usually a little optimistic. So it's interesting how 60 people that will have no say on anything, they'll be out of office come January 6th, are making all these decisions now for spending for next year and everything else. That this lame duck session is always an interesting time.
Interesting. And then when you come back January 6th, do you anticipate to hit the ground running with the new people?
Yes. In fact, we've added a week into our early schedule. The way we'd been doing it the last few years is we'd work 3 weeks or so, and then we'd have 1 full week in the district to do things such as this show and visit school. I'm going to speak at the Carthage School here in a little bit this afternoon when I leave here. And so the new leader, Kevin McCarthy, has said we're going to work 6 weeks straight to start the beginning of the year so we can get off and running. So you're exactly right. When you say off and running, that's what we plan to do. So it's going to be a new Congress.
New Congress, a lot of behind-the-scenes work getting new Congress ready to go when people open up those doors and come into work.
It's such an interesting dynamic on office space up there. My freshman year, I drew 6th from the bottom, so in theory, and a lot of people from the Joplin area have visited me at my office in Washington. In theory, I have the 6th worst office out of 435 because that's all that was left to choose from my freshman year. I had six choices, so pick the best of the worst 6, Billy. I did. I like my office, though. It's a small office, but we really, really have done well there. It's very functional. It's across the street from the Capitol. I can go down the elevator, walk right across to the Capitol. My committee, Energy and Commerce, is in the next building over. I can walk out a side door, walk up a short driveway, and Energy and Commerce just happens to be right there, first floor as I walk in, so it's very convenient. Last year I didn't move my office, and 2 weeks ago we made a decision not to move again. So for my 3rd term, I'm still going to be in one of the 6th worst offices on the Hill.
But for people visiting, as you say, your constituents, as they come to visit, they'll be able to find you.
Sure,
they're not going to say, where's he moved to?
Right, and it's in a private hallway, and I think that's why it was left. There's 2 long hallways, and Longworth is the building I'm in, and there's a private hallway behind there. I'm the only office in that hallway, and so it's actually very convenient. And so I want to encourage people, if you are coming to Washington, let us know ahead of time. I hate it when I come home and people say, I was in D.C. 2 weeks ago. You didn't call. We didn't want to bother you. I want people to bother me. I want them to come. I want them to let us set up tours for them of the Capitol and the Washington Monument and the Holocaust Museum, and anything they want to see, we can usually augment helping them to get tickets to things. So I want to encourage that, and also want to encourage our veterans that are having issues. We have a lady in our office in Springfield that handles nothing but veterans issues. She has very good success helping with veterans issues. A veteran can call the VA and not get very far, and when the congressman calls, usually they snap to a little better. And that's one thing that Congress does that people don't realize. Everyone's interested in the budget and what you're going to do in Washington, what's coming up next. Our real work a lot of times is done at home, helping people right here, whether it's an IRS issue or an SBA issue or a veterans issue, whatever that may be. And so our constituent services, we have an office right here on 32nd Street in Joplin, and an office in Springfield and one in Washington. So we try and be very accessible to the folks.
Right. Well, a lot of ways to help serve the district and serve the people. And Congressman, I'd like to thank you for being on the program today and visiting for our viewers.
Well, thank you for the invite. I appreciate it very much. I always enjoy being here. And don't call unless you want me to show up, because I'll always show up.
All right. Well, thank you. And I'd like to thank you, the viewers, for joining us this week on Newsmakers. I'll see you again next week at the same time on this station.